Okay, so now I want to present Professor Pablo Abitbol. We have talked a lot about Pablo yesterday and today. So, Pablo is professor of the Bolivar Technological University and is part of the historic memory in the Montes de María. He is working with the Felipe de Vergara and the Javeriana team and also with the Andes University, and they have done interesting work of working in economy, philosophy, and joint community work. So now, Pablo, go ahead with his presentation. Thank you very much. Okay, I'm Pablo Abitbol. I am coordinator of the Stonic Memory Group of the Technological University of Bolivar. We have our branch in Cartagena. I will talk about what we are doing in terms of being able to connect with the agendas of research in neuroscience, cognitive science, science of behavior, etc. So I will be presenting my research group, regional group of historic memory, the logo. You will see that is inverted representation of the Minotaurus labyrinth. We just wanted to reflect some things that you can see there in terms of the labyrinths of memory of this ear of this structure that is similar to a brain to be able to capture all the dimensions we want to where we want to work memory from the research group. It was created in February 2015 based on an educational experience started in 2012 as a seed of a memory. When I come to the Technological University of Bolivar in Cartagena, I start talking to the students and our colleagues, and it emerges a little bit like what in Buddhism is called the sin of intentional ignorance in the region, and is not wanting to know, not wanting to hear, not wanting to hear about the human tragedy that have been happening for decades, 30 minutes, 1 hour away in the Montes de Maria, etc. So there was like that the discomfort in people about these topics, and we decided that one of the responsibilities that we had in the regional academia was to make people uncomfortable with the reality and the historic reality, making memory. So we created that research bank or seed bank that today is the heart of the regional group of historic memory, which after our first research in the south of Bolivar in Sao Paulo, where we did this exercise about the assassination of a community leader that who wanted to become a journalist to expose the alliance between local elites and paramilitary, was murdered when we gave this material to his family, the community, etc. We became as a regional group of historic memory within a process that we developed with the National Center. And since we are 25 regional groups in the country working now, the regional group of historic memory develop participatory research actions, and this for us it makes reference to the legacy of teacher, Professor Franz Porta, and the idea is that many times the standards of the quartiles and the ranking and have like this incentive that we might seem to other universities to have this path. We say these universities and the research groups are invented and are in the Javeriana and this we what is it what we want to do and what is our role, and that much in line we feel more or less producers of vanguard knowledge and more like synthesizers of a knowledge to translate it into the needs that the communities express. So that's why this connection more efficient and more in the territory. From that perspective, It means that is the action research participatory. Actually, participatory action research. Actually, recognizing that in our research we assume this policy. So we want to balance in the power relationships in a region where the economic inequalities and power inequalities are huge, and therefore university and the knowledge that we can bring to the territory play an important role that would allow the non-repetition. So, what was the so we developed this participatory research aimed at the collective memory in the Colombian Caribbean, and here I would like to start reflecting about the connection of neuroscience and behavioral science due to the emphasis that we place in memory. In the sense of economic theory, according to which deliberation is a process of exchanging reasons and arguments amongst peers or equals in the very well designed situational context that allow to have confluence in terms of beliefs and values in population groups that have to make a collective decision. So this is very important for us because the collective memory, as the individual memory helps you make better decisions, the collective memory helps a territory to make better collective decisions. Like once a participant said in one of our memory workshops, we were asking what's historic memory for, what is this, and they said for our children not to keep voting for our victimizers. So for us, that political perspective is extremely or is key. Also, because there are so many perspectives, not only in terms of what it was, but also in terms of the interpretation about what it was. It's important to generate this deliberation in the territories to reach a certain minimums, we don't say maximum, but minimums, consensus about what happened. That is the construction of historical truth, which is the process where we are now going with this report of the Commission Truth. And this helps a lot to for this interesting phenomenon is that when you build that social memory, that also reverts towards the psychological, towards the individual and personal, and gives us that sense that it's indeed a psychosocial process. Because many times in the workshops, people listening to each other, they say, "Oh yeah, 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 that was different, but something's happening. How did it happen?" I remember about that differently, about how it happens. So deliver the dialing deliberation, the design of situations through roles of engagement in the social also reverts you to the individual and to the memories. That is also important because there is something that we know about the neuroscience of memory is that it's reconstructive. It's not something passive, but it's active, where the brain participates by rebuilding, especially trying for the person to have this sense of coherence, not only in terms of individual identity, but also moral identity. And in that sense, one might say, but well, the reconstruction of collective memory, if a memory is always fragmented and probably wrong, uh, collective memories is going to be chaos. But what we know is that the collective memories, when there is deliberation, what it does is like polishing those individual memories. So for us, it's really important this deliberative construction of the collective memory, and I underline that in purple because for us the purple lenses are key. The gender perspective, and in particular, empowerment of women in the rural communities. We work mainly today and for about 6-7 years in this region. Montes de María is a sub-region of the Colombian Caribbean that is located between Cartagena and Sincelejo, and between the Magdalena River and the Caribbean Sea, and is basically what is known as the San Jacinto Sierra. Is 15 municipalities spread along Sucre and Bolivar. Here there's a map that you might be able to see or not, but here, let's see if it works. So it's special for our international guests and those who are listening and the streaming and can probably see where is it that we were talking about. Should I keep going? Yeah. Okay, so now we were talking about the fact that here in academia, scholars in the universities, the concept is more like sophisticated, is the word that you use, but regionally you are seeking for a synthesis of memory. I cannot like describe, but can you say what is the specific search in terms of memory that you think that is actually important? Yep. The reference is to the universities in Bogota or in the largest cities. I think that when I see what they do in Los Andes National Javeriana University is cutting edge knowledge. Yeah, yeah. And many times the pressure of the rankings and publishing, etc., that is imposed upon us in regional or smaller city universities is to try to go there. That the pressure is trying to be able to get into the club of the rankings, and what we are seeing is that would imply that we should take a path that would mean that the trade-off is and what has happened actually is leaving aside the deep needs that the communities have that we have here so close, and they come not in terms of producing vanguard knowledge, but to take that vanguard cutting edge knowledge so that it can be translated in terms of the communities, especially the rural communities have been like oppressed and forgotten, so that they can participate with more empowerment in the process of decision makings over their own territories. That's basically it. Thanks.
Thank you. Woo. All right, so that's the location of Montes de Maria, the Maria Mountains. It is a sub-region of the Colombian Caribbean. It is between the cities of Cartagena and Sincelejo, between the Magdalena River and the Caribbean Ocean. There are 15 municipalities within Sucre and Bolivar horribly affected by the internal armed conflict, especially during the 90s and 2000s. So especially throughout the 90s, 95, 2005, but still today heavily affected by conflict and political violence. You've seen that the Gulf of Clan forced us to stay confined in our territories. We weren't able to go out. We were unable to go shopping. There was a food safety crisis because even when you see a tremendous reduction of violence, in this case measured in terms of murder rates, the territorial control that was generated through that violence is the territorial control today. So that criminal partnership between politicians, business persons, and paramilitaries are today governing over those territories. That implies huge levels of poverty. This is just a spatial representation of unsatisfied basic needs and multi-dimensional poverty, specifically in the rural area that reaches levels up to 70 to 85% of the population that has unsatisfied basic needs. What have we been doing recently in the regional group of historical memory? Our first line of work is historical memory itself, meaning contributing by triangulating historical files, interviews, etc., and memory activities to rebuild what happened and how we feel about what happened and how should we process it, etc. We have produced several reports. This one is interesting, is what we call with the victims working group of Cartagena, because this is the real map of Cartagena. Because there is a myth that cities weren't affected by the conflict, but there was actually a lot of victims in the cities and there were war scenarios. But during these 3 years, what we have done is we have a, stopped doing research and prioritizing the reports that we provide to the comprehensive peace system, which is now the comprehensive peace system. It used to have a more complex name. Now, the Montes de María under fire. This is done through a dialogue methodology. We as academics, we enable communities and leaders, social leaders, to implement this systematically in these reports that are submitted to the Commission of Truth and to the justice system, to the transitional justice system. You can find this report online. This is the most deep text. It has the names of business persons, politicians, and military that contributed to the instrumentalization of violence, of paramilitary and guerrilla violence, and causing that social order that's today in the territory. The second one is a report that we did jointly with those who are still alive from the Workers' Revolutionary Party, which was a guerrilla that operated in that area, but they demobilized and they gave them a space in the 91 Constitution, and they were the ones who proposed a fast board for constitutional reforms. So this is about the genocide of the PRT, of this movement, because after they demobilized, they were killed systematically, as happened with the UP and is happening with its FARC. So this has important knowledge regarding what we're living today in Colombia. And a report on displacement and land uh, robbery by guerrillas, paramilitaries, and the army. This is another line of work that we called performative memory. This is based on anthropology, on Erving Goffman work, but also in the philosophy of language and epistemology, mainly based on Austin and John Searle. And it's the performance understood not only as that speech creates social reality, but also memory. When we act and not just when we listen, we understand better. So memory is not only conceived as a cognitive process, but also as a performative process. And this was funny. Suddenly we had a meeting at the office of the chancellor and the vice chancellor of the university because I said the friends from the old association, colleagues from the association, I read and read from land grabs from the 70s that they enter the states. I don't understand it. How did that work? How did they enter? How was that dynamic? So we were able to exchange knowledge, and we said we're gonna recreate a land grabbing like the ones you did for those leaders. It was great to go to the university and be with 200 students doing a land grab and recreating it. And so where we were able to understand because we were living it some way or another, despite the meeting that I had at the office of the chancellor of the university. And we also have in that regards a course on that field taught by campesinos, by peasants, with the rank is that everyone must have a PhD. So we said, you may have a PhD, but do you know how to produce your own food? So we were able to hire a campesino professor without a PhD, without a master's degree, without undergrad, without even high school. But he's teaching us not just how to sharp a knife or how to plant a crop, but also about what he lived as a peasant leader, displaced, living for 3 years in Cartagena, selling water at lights because the paramilitaries threatened him and killed his father, and how that compelled him to study the land law. And you understand, so for us performance is key, and I not an expert on these fields, but I think it may be interesting in terms of neuroscience and cognitive sciences and human behavior. Specifically deliberative memory, we implemented it through the peace lectureship, readings of the peace agreements in the territories. Now we are implementing deliberative processes, reading the report published by the Truth Commission. But here what we do is we play with the margin that we have on universities and to do this peace lectureship as we wish. Unlike schools where it's somehow imposed by the central authority. So this gives us some room on how, and we're able to experiment on this peace lectureship to make sure it works and it serves its purpose um, for all the country. So simply I want to take advantage of the opportunity to say that for us it's been very important, the Tel Aviv paradigm, Bartal, etc., Boas and co-authors. We have seen how at companies we did research comparing businesses, university and rural communities, and the mind freezing in preconceptions about peace and the possibility of accomplishing peace. These are anchored in private organization more than in the rural sector and than in university. This is a study that my students from the seedbed did with some colleagues of the university, and also honor the memory of Emile Bruno, we have implemented the dehumanization paradigm, seeing how the peace lectureship in a pre and post test doesn't modify the levels of dehumanization even at the university level, and that's why we believe that we need to keep moving forward towards more solid designs, more systematic and deeper on how to be able to make sure that the peace lectureship is deliberative. And now we understand the visual, the emotional, the artistic, what role they play, and how we can convey that knowledge to school teachers who are tired of and they need tools to do key work for history, for the past that we will be, as my teacher Maria Emma Wilson would say. And we support processes, social processes from academia through a platform called Regional Peacebuilding Working Group for the Maria Mountains, and it has 200 civil organizations, including Afro-Colombians, LGBT, campesine organizations, and we undertake processes with them, for example, reconciliation processes and unlikely dialogues. For example, in this image, this is the person from the PRT, one of the survivors of the PRT. This is one of the killers, a paramilitary commander in the Colombian Caribbean. And this is someone who was kidnapped by FARC and then by paramilitary. This is a FARC commander, victim of the Chengen massacre. Rafa, victim of the Las Brisas massacre. And a peace builder teacher, expert on human rights, very dear to us, Ricardo Esquile. So we need a lot of help in terms of behavioral cognitive neuroscience perspective to see how we can strengthen those processes, those reconciliations and unlikely dialogues processes. What are we doing now? We are developing a stage of our research process, which is also important for people in the territories. They tell us that logic behind the projects leave them incomplete. These projects are sort of incomplete. So we shifted from a project logic to a process logic, in which the grants and what we're able to obtain, we make sure to implement them long term and to build trust with communities. In this case, we are developing a stage of the research process of historical memory at the Maria Mountains to establish what are the institutional legacy of the conflict. What is the order that it's rooted, not just on who owns what in terms of economy and political, but who owns what in terms of mind models that are operating as cultural validation of conflict. So there are several things that we may take a look at in terms of neuroscience from a cognitive science perspective. Of course, social norms and political culture and the work undertaken with Bikiri, but I'm also interested on 6 and 7, and specifically 6 and 7 we are failing, we're lacking, and by we I mean the Ministry of Defense, because they recruit 18-year-old kids, they train them in a patriarchal system under an authoritarian model, and then they send them back without any sort of resocialization strategy to communities where there's no education or jobs. So they pay them $1,000,000 a month, they equip them with a gun and a motorcycle, and they become kingpins. And that creates violence across the territories. So we need to work with a specific community, which are the military and police officers and those who leave those forces, because we have a militarized culture in Colombia that is causing a lot of harm. The other thing we're doing is this beautiful project. This is a participation model, psychosocial care and the main researcher is Professor Wilson Lopez. We are conducting this jointly with Universidad Javeriana, and we are addressing the need, a need that has been overly stated by leaders, by social leaders at communities, at rural communities, and is that they don't have mental health protection or care, and they have issues because they have sleep disorders, they have stress, they're desperate. But from those communities, through probably cultural evolutionary process, there are practices that emerge based on indigenous Afro and Campesino traditions that are work for them. And the classical example are the weavers from Mampuhan, who are women who create those spaces that are particularly exclusive for women, safe spaces for women, and they do their community. But I would like to be a part of it, but they don't allow me. It's difficult. And they weave, and it allows them to process memory in a way in which they're not just producing memory, but they're reliving trauma and desperation. And their works are at the National Museum. You may go visit them. And the idea is how we can create deliberative processes between communities and these emerging community practices of self-care and self-psychosocial attention, and how the institutional will be embedded so that we recognize and value that, and thereby improve mental health and psychosocial care and protection, considering their practices and traditions that actually work. So it's to shift the logic, and instead of saying we psychologists are experts and we know what works and what doesn't, but to take a look at what's actually working for them and how we can explain that from science to strengthen it and institutionalize it. And finally, the project we are undertaking, funded by the Templeton Foundation with the leadership of Felipe de Brigar from Duke University, Professor Wilson Lopez from Javeriana University, and Professor Santiago Amaya from Universidad de los Andes. This is called Memory and Forgiveness, a neuroscientific and philosophical exploration, in which we seek, from a neuroscience perspective, to understand the interaction between memory processes and forgiveness processes. And we are setting up at the Bolivar Technological University a neuroscience lab that starts with a biophysiology team, and we hope that we are able to also have an electro brain imaging team, and invite you that if you want to join us, you are most welcome in Cartagena to work with communities of Montes de María and the Canal del Dique, that these perspectives that I've been listening throughout these 2 days and tomorrow as well, which are fascinating and I believe are very useful and very practical for certain territories that have suffered and still suffer, and there's a lot to be done and built. So that's all. Thank you all for your attention.